Let's talk about witches and riding broomsticks. Why are witches depicted riding broomsticks? Who was the first person to confess to it? Where did this idea emerge from? Let's talk about it. Brooms have been around since ancient times, back when people used sticks and natural fibers to pick up dust and ash. The word broom actually comes from the plant that was originally used to make these early sweeping tools. From the get-go, brooms were mostly linked with women and their domestic duties. Here's where it gets really interesting. The first person to ever confess to riding a broom was a man named Guillaume Edelin. He was a priest in Paris in 1453. He got himself into some hot water for criticizing the church's stance on witches. And under torture specifically, he admitted to flying on a broomstick. Despite his later repentance, he still got a life sentence in prison. I always think it is questionable when someone admits to something while they are being tortured, because they could be just admitting to it so that the torture stops. But even before Guillaume's confession, the belief of witches flying on broomsticks was already a thing. In 1451, there were images of witches flying on broomsticks in a French manuscript. These witches were linked to a Christian sect called the Waldensians, who were seen as heretics because they let women become priests. So where did the riding broomsticks come in? Some believe that it might have roots in pagan rituals where farmers would dance on broomsticks or poles under a full moon to boost their crops. Over time, this ritual might have been mixed up with stories of witches flying on brooms, where they would fly to secret meetings to have group fun time. Back in the Middle Ages, people had wild beliefs about witches and broomsticks. Take Lady Alice Kittler, for example. She was accused of sorcery in 1324, and investigators claimed that they found a pipe of ointment in her house. Apparently, she would grease up a staff with ointment and ride it like a horse. And what was the ointment? Allegedly, witches would brew up this ointment from plants like belladonna, which is also known as deadly nightshade, henbane, mandrake, and jimson weed, which all contain hallucinogenic chemicals. Instead of swallowing these trippy concoctions, they'd rub them on their skin, even in some really personal places, like their armpits or their cookies, or on the broomsticks or staffs, which they would then straddle commando. Here's the kicker. It's hard to say if these stories were legit or just a product of medieval paranoia. Most of what we know about witches from back then came from religious folks or from people who were admitting to things under torture. Fast forward to the 17th century, and stories of witches flying on broomsticks out of chimneys started to become a thing. Weird, right? Especially since women were becoming even more tied to their household duties. There was a rumor that witches would leave their homes through the chimney, though not many admitted to it even under torture. Now, in the next video, I am going to talk about Alice Kittler, who has an extraordinary story. She was accused of witchcraft. I'm not sure if she was a witch, but she was definitely doing some sketchy things. Anyways, that's it for witches and broomsticks. Also, I just want to say that the shirt that I'm wearing right now is Medusa holding a head, and it says girl dinner. Iconic. It's from New Blood Universe, the paranormal production company that is helping me and my best friend to create a show about a road trip where we explore and investigate the paranormal. So make sure you're following them on all socials. Make sure you're following me on all socials. And that's it for this one. But come back for when we talk about Alice Kittler.